Okay, we want to pick up Proverbs today. We had a little introduction in terms of just sharing Proverbs and Proverbs that you enjoy. Message statement of Proverbs, a collection of extended discourses. If you look at your notes on page 7. Extended discourses and self-contained maxims. The book of Proverbs, which you've already read, has 9 chapters of really extended discussion, extended exhortation and motivation. Actually, those 9 chapters are designed with one main purpose, and that is to get the young, the naive, the adolescent launching into adulthood to commit to pursuing the way of wisdom. The instruction of that way begins in chapter 10. But those first 9 chapters are from various aspects. The father, exhorting the child to be wise, to choose wisdom, to commit to wisdom. And until that happens, you won't learn wisdom. You don't fall into wisdom. You naturally fall into foolishness because that's the way of the flesh. And the warning is about that. So the first 9 chapters are an extended discourse designed to motivate by positive benefit to be received and by the negative consequences if the way of wisdom is not followed, to motivate to choose wisdom. And you are all there. We are all there. We must choose to follow wisdom and then commit our way to it. You don't just fall into it. It doesn't just happen. And so those extended discourses are to that end, and then it starts in chapter 10 with the little self-contained maxim statements, which we will look at in a moment. Secondly, they are generalizations about how life works in God's world. They are pretty much common sense. Anybody, when they read these, can pretty much see the benefits. And so they are really, and they prove to be, as you try them, as anybody would try them, to be workable, to be just common sense exhortation about how life works in God's world. And they're designed to produce, fourthly, in the hearer, a successful life experience. We talked about the word chokhmah, basically having the idea of skill. It's used in various artistic and performance type ways, but it is used in this context of the skill of living life, the skill of navigating through the various things that you will experience on a day-to-day basis as you deal with people, as you run into situations and circumstances and so forth. And so both in the short term and over the long stretch, they are designed to produce in the hearer a successful life experience. In other words, to make life work as smoothly as it can. And to do that both by warning against foolish actions and by instructing in the wise ways to speak and to act and to react to various situations. Fourthly, and this is important, we'll come back to this after we look at the third guideline, to the degree that such an experience depends upon his or her own actions and choices. There is a factor involved in the universe that we do not control. We do not have control over everything. We cannot control all responses to us. We cannot control situations and circumstances. Job and Ecclesiastes deal with that aspect of the problem of living life. And so there is a provision here, and we will come back to that. But this is a summary of the book of Proverbs that helps us understand how it's put together. It involves the idea of likeness, this word does. For instance, in Psalm 49:12, it says, "Nevertheless, man, though in honor does not remain, he is like the beasts that perish." And that word like, Hebrew mashal. It's the idea of comparison or likeness. In 1 Samuel chapter 10 and verse 12, it's talking about Saul, then a man from there answered, but who is their father? Therefore it became a proverb. Is Saul also among the prophets? And so we find the idea of Proverbs in other places of Scripture, but it's the idea of comparison. We know how that works. It's an object lesson. We hear from the Latin. Proverb is from the Latin instead of many words. Instead of many words. It's a maxim. A maxim is a short, pithy. Do you know what pithy means? Probably not. Short, provocative. It brings immediately to mind some kind of a sharp image that helps make a point. And the maxims are compact, memorable, and transferable. If you will look back to, I think it's page 1 of your, it's not page 1, let's see, there it is. Yeah, look back to page 1 of your notes on Hebrew poetry, and much of this is summarized there. And so Hebrew poetry is compact communication, and a maxim is that. It's compact, it's memorable, it's transferable. So it's a saying that immediately brings to mind some image that helps to make a point or a connection to the lesson that is being given. For instance, a stitch in time saves 9. What does that mean? A stitch in time saves 9. First of all, what realm does it come from? There's a hint up there. Sewing. All right? A stitch in time saves 9. Anybody got an idea, Adam?
If there's a little tear, if you fix it now, you won't have to fix it more later.
Okay, good. Little tear, you fix it now. For instance, if my shirt pocket just started to come unstitched here at the top, and I noticed that, and I say, oh my, that's coming undone. And I ignore it, and I keep putting pins in it. Okay, after a while, it's going to get all the way down to here. And then, to fix it, I'm going to have to sew it all the way up. Okay, and I can't do that very straight. But if I just take care of it right away, that works, okay? And that's what a proverb is. It's a short, little pithy saying that gives you an image that allows you to make certain points that can be applied in general way. That's transferable. Another one, even a blind pig finds an acorn once in a while. Now, you've probably never heard that. Anybody ever heard that? Okay. Was it pig or was it a squirrel? Pig? How many of you have heard it as a pig? So somebody has. So I'm not the only one in the world. Is there? My friend used to say this all the time in high school. I thought it was my dad, but I think it was his dad, and he said it. Even a blind pig finds an acorn once in a while. What does that mean? Jeff?
It means if you do something good, it doesn't mean you're anything special, because a blind pig can be.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually a put down. It's a diss, all right? You know, you say, oh boy, I got a date with so-and-so. Yeah, well, even a blind pig finds an acorn once in a while. You all know how it works, yeah. It's a put down, all right? But it's a little saying that makes a point. You get the point, all right? And that's what that's what a maxim is, all right? And that's how Proverbs work. And so it's they're designed to give us those little transferable images by which points can be made. Okay, so that's the general idea of a proverb. So it's an object lesson via a comparison or analogy. That's point 3 there under Roman numeral 2. And here are just some passages that you can jot down. I'm not going to take time to read them. Ezekiel 16:44, it uses this idea as a general truth. Indeed, everyone who quotes Proverbs will use this proverb against you, like mother, like daughter. Okay, like father, like son. You're your mother's daughter, loathing husband and children. You are the sister of your sisters. And so it's a saying, again, that emphasizes a general truth. Psalm 78, verses 2 to 6. We have the idea of of a lesson drawn from experience. Psalm 78. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings. Parable, the word mashal, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from our children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and His strength and His wonderful works that He has done. For He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children. And so just lessons that are desired to be passed on from parents to children. They will do it with proverbs, with little sayings. And Deuteronomy 28:37 will talk about a common example. And so they are object lessons via comparison or analogy. And so the general aim or general purpose, there, number 4, of a proverb is to help one choose the best course of action among those that are available. To help one choose the best course of action among those that are available. And so that is the general tenor of the maxim statements of Proverbs that begin in chapter 10. Is to, by images, by little statements, by statements that provoke various thoughts, that provoke various ideas of consequence and warning or in promise and blessing, is to provoke, to move, to help people choose the best course of action among those that are available. And you're familiar with this. Your parents had various sayings. What are some sayings that your parents were always uttering to help you? Jeff? It's the way the ball bounces. In other words, get over it. Life isn't always go the way we like it to. Jeff? Nelson? Yeah, if your friends jump off a cliff, would you do it too? All right? Kyle? Is that your mom or your dad? Okay. That's a warning, isn't it? Right. Okay. Anybody else? Just live with it. Okay.
Get your undies out of a wad.
All right. Liz?
From Proverbs, Mom would always say, where there's no wood, the fire goes out.
Where there's no wood, the fire goes out. Right. Okay. Yes. You don't work, you don't eat. Yeah. The world doesn't revolve around you. Life's not fair. Okay, so we use proverbs. We use proverbial type statements, maxims, in order to communicate truths that are important in living. And so that's what the book of Proverbs is about, and that's how it works beginning in chapter 10. Now, turn to page 8, look at the guidelines. There are 4 guidelines in interpreting Proverbs that I want to just comment upon. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the rest of that. The foolish way is to be avoided, the wise way to be followed. So, along with that general aim, that's the overall context. These Proverbs will all be directed toward choosing the wise way and avoiding the foolish way. And, of course, that is in keeping with the whole purpose of Proverbs. Okay, the first guideline for Proverbs is knowing the purpose and setting. And we find that in the first 7 verses. And there are 2 purposes for Proverbs stated in the first 7 verses, first 6 verses. One is to develop moral skillfulness. Now, skill in living can be a very practical thing. You could talk about business skills. You can talk about, skills in terms of studying, in terms of being a student. And the word can be used in those contexts, like you had skills of the artisans building the tabernacle, of musicians, of people sailing ships. And so this word in the Bible and elsewhere has the idea of those kinds of skills. But in Proverbs, It is moral skillfulness. It is character skillfulness. These aren't just mechanistic, okay, how to get through the day with the least amount of problems, how to get my way with my friends. I mean, they're not manipulative, things like that. It really is designed toward the character that God wants us to develop. And so it's moral skillfulness. The second purpose stated in this is mental discernment. These proverbs help you come to be more discerning mentally. Not smarter, but more discerning. To be able to analyze ideas, to be able to analyze people, to be able to look at a situation and think about it and think about, what's going to happen here? If I do this in this situation, where's it going to lead? Probably there. I don't want to be there. Okay? In other words, it helps you avoid having to live life simply by trial and error. Okay? Or trial and consequence. Now, some of you tend to live life like that. Just go until you bump into something and change directions and go again. Some people are just like that. Okay? Proverbs says, don't live like that. Learn to anticipate. Learn to think ahead. And so it will use words like discernment and sagacity and prudence. You may have to go look those up after class. Okay? That's not a woman's name, Prudence. To be able to think, to be able to plan ahead, to be able to anticipate things that are going to happen, and plan to avoid them. We have some friends in Edmonton, and we visited them one day, or a few years ago in the summer, and they just bought a mobile home that they were going to use to do some extensive travel in the summer. And they, had a house where they didn't really have a place to park this. They didn't have a rear alley or lane, and so they had a front garage going out into the street. And so they parked this mobile home as far over as they could on the edge of the driveway, but it kind of hung out over where the vehicle would back out of one of the stalls in the garage, a double garage. And so the wife, mother, friend of ours, she said, someday I'm going to jump in my van and I'm going to back out of there. I'm going to forget that thing is there. And I want to run right into it. So what she did is she pasted a note on her steering wheel that said, watch out for RV in back, or something like that. She said she took it into the garage, and then the mechanic got in and he looked at this and said, what in the world is this? And, I had no idea what it is. The way it was worded just really looked strange if you didn't know what she was trying to avoid. But she was thinking ahead. She was thinking, I just know that I'm going to jump in, taking the kids to school in a hurry, and I'm going to forget that thing is there. So I'm going to remind myself. And so she wrote herself a note and taped it on the middle of her steering wheel. All right? That's prudence. That's looking ahead. That's planning for success rather than failure. It's planning to avoid failure. And Proverbs is designed to teach us to do that. And so it teaches us mental discernment and how to evaluate ideas and people and situations, as well as just the skillful application of Proverbs to those situations. You don't have to try and take this down, but if you just were to study this passage in chapter 2, it says, for attaining wisdom and instruction, for comprehending the words of understanding. And those are the two purposes. They're then picked up in verses 3 and 4, the first one, for acquiring instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple, to the young, knowledge and discretion. And so you can see here it's for attaining wisdom and instruction, discipline in living. That word instruction, musar, is the word that is often translated correction, something a father does for children when they're kind of going astray, verbal warning, verbal reinforcing of what they need to do, sometimes corporal discipline in order to attach a consequence with the behavior, but it's training. And then it picks up in the second part for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. And so there is a mental component to Proverbs as well as a practical behavioral type component. There's a parenthetical statement in verse 5, let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. And basically what that is an admonition to always, always, always be on the path of wisdom, to never give up pursuing wisdom. The wise are to listen and to add to their learning, to add to their skillfulness in living life. And the discerning are to get guidance. You will never come to the point where you have arrived and you can stop pursuing the way of wisdom. In fact, the moment you do that, you are headed toward foolishness. And who is the greatest example of that? The man who wrote this book, Solomon, who did not listen to his own advice, who did not pay attention to Torah when it says, do not multiply wives, and who allowed his heart to be led off into false worship through his foreign wives. So the warning is there and the admonition is there to make this a lifelong pursuit. So that's the double purpose, to moral skillfulness and mental discernment. The controlling mindset in verse 7 is the fear of the Lord. And we talked about that. This is Proverbs is something that will only work fully through the perspective of faith, through the relationship with the God who is ultimately the source of Proverbs, who is ultimately the source of this wisdom. And so the controlling mindset in verse 7 is the fear of the Lord, which we have already looked at. Now, the second guideline for Proverbs, for understanding Proverbs, is recognize the forms and the devices. Recognize the forms and the devices. We've already indicated this. Really, there are two types of statements. There is the admonition, and that's chapters 1 to 9. And chapters 1 to 9 are designed to motivate you to commit yourself to the way of wisdom. And it's something that you have to do as a prior commitment. You will not fall into wisdom. It will not accidentally happen. It will only happen as you mine for it like treasure, as you give yourself to it. But then there is the second type of statement, and that is the wisdom sentence or the maxim that we find in chapters 10 to 31. So just again, note that those are the two main forms in the book of Proverbs, the admonition and the wisdom sentence. And to recognize that Proverbs is poetry. This is on page 9. Proverbs is poetry. Again, if you will look back to page 1 of your notes, under the summary of Hebrew poetry, much of this is there. Why poetry? Why does anybody write poetry? You've asked that question in English in high school and junior high. Why don't you just tell me what you're trying to tell me? Why do you give me all these images? And why do you make it so hard? Anybody ever felt that about poetry? Sure you have. Why poetry? Well, there are some reasons. It resonates with our inner states of being. We do respond to images. It invites pondering. It's memorable. It appeals to the emotions. And so there is reason for poetry in all of life. And in Hebrew, we have poetry as well. The idea in Hebrew poetry involves idea rhyme rather than sound or meter rhyme. Now that makes good sense. Why? It makes good sense for us. Why? Because if Hebrew poetry basically worked around rhyme and meter, you'd be left out because none of you read Hebrew. Right? But because it's ideas, and ideas can be brought across in translation, though rhyme and meter never can in languages. If you've ever tried to translate poetry from one language to another and try to retain rhyme and meter, you know how difficult that is. Sometimes you can force it to work a little bit, but rarely can you ever, well, never can you fully bring across everything. And so since Hebrew poetry trades in the ideas and the rhyming in a sense of ideas, then it's accessible to all people in all languages through translation. And so that's the genius of this type of literature, and of course God is behind that. And so I want to think a little bit about the poetry of Proverbs. First of all, it's the language of sensory experience. Images, we respond to images, we respond to these little sayings. They just attack us or confront us in a significant way. And it is the interplay of paired ideas rather than rhyme, rather than meter. It's the paired ideas that we have. And this pairing of ideas is called parallelism. And there are types of parallelism. And you have a little chart there with some examples on the right. And it gives us the kinds of parallelism that there are. There's synonymous parallelism, which is restatement, antithetical, which is opposite statement, synthetic, which is completion, comparison, the better than Proverbs, and sharpening. Okay, let's look at examples for each one of these. The first, 22:1, is an example of synonymous parallelism. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. All right, that makes the point. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. We don't normally think of a good name and riches, all right? But here in this short little statement, something about a good name is being communicated to be valuable. So we all know great riches, value. And then it pairs it with the idea loving favor rather than silver or gold. You have to supply is to be chosen, but you can see how it is saying basically the same thing in two different ways. A good name, better than great riches. Loving favor rather than silver or gold. And so this is an idea of synonymous parallelism. However, it's not exactly synonymous, is it? Silver and gold is exactly synonymous to riches, but how is a good name synonymous with loving favor? They're both positive. They both run in the same realm. But what's the relationship between good name and loving favor? Thoughts? Jeff?
If you have a good reputation, people will love you.
People will love you. All right. Is there another person who it might be referring to? Well, God. All right. Who does God favor? Who does He pour His special attention to? Well, those who become transformed, those who walk as He walks. And a good name, loving favor, or by God's loving favor, we come to have a good name. It's through His grace, it's through His mercy that we come to have a good reputation. And so sometimes you have not exact synonymous parallelism, but there is an advance. And this is one of the ways you want to read Proverbs, is sometimes the second statement, even though it's in a parallel form, kind of advances this. And basically what it's doing is it's connecting a good name. In other words, people think good of us when they hear our name with God's role in our lives, God's purpose, God's resources, what He inputs into our lives. But anyway, that is an example of synonymous parallelism. The second one, a prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Here you have the opposite statement. And in fact, this is by far the predominant form, the predominant parallelism that you find in the book of Proverbs. Why do you suppose that would be? What's Proverbs designed to do? Emily? Right. Proverbs is designed to draw our commitment to wisdom instead of foolishness. And so there you have the two big contrasting paths. There's two paths in life. And so most of the Proverbs have to do with a contrast in some way. The wicked and the righteous, and so forth. So a prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. And that's what I was talking about. The ability to think ahead, the ability to anticipate. You see evil, you see bad things happening, and you hide yourself from that. What does the simple do? The simple is a class 1 fool, all right? That's where everybody starts. I mentioned the 5 classes on Wednesday, didn't I? The 5. Class 1 fool. The simple passes on, just doesn't think about what's going to happen, and they're punished, okay? Hey, let's go do such and such. Oh, yeah, great. Let's go. Wait. Think about this. Where are you going? With whom? To do what? And you just don't have any warning flags there? All right, fine. I'll visit you tomorrow morning in jail. And we'll talk about it. So antithetical parallelism. Okay? And this is the type of parallelism you'll find predominantly, or the predominant type of Proverbs. Okay, then there's synthetic parallelism. The rich and the poor have this in common: the Lord is maker of them all. Now, you don't have a contrast or a restatement. Synthetic basically means a sin putting together, and so it's like the 2 lines are required for the whole thought. The second one completes the first. And so it's more like a single idea statement. They're paired in form, but they are not restating in positive or negative. So synthetic means that the second line completes the thought of the first. The rich and the poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all. So it's parallelism in form, but not so much a rhyming of ideas as the 2 lines required to make the one statement. Proverbs 16:18, better is a little with righteousness than vast revenues without justice. This is sort of like the synthetic. The second line is required to complete the first line, but it is the better than. You have this clear thing. And so there is a contrast: better is a little with righteousness than vast revenues without justice. In a sense, it's sort of antithetic. It's kind of a combination of antithetical and synthetic. So that's the better than. Pretty easy to tell because you have the words better and than. And then there's the sharpening parallelism. He who has a deceitful heart finds no good. He who has a perverse tongue falls into evil. There is a parallelism here, a type of synonymous parallelism, except the second is just really sharpening. The deceitful heart, the perverse tongue. And so it is going further. It is a significant step. Not just a slight difference, but a significant difference. And so it's not close enough to be synonymous. And so we call that sharpening. Now you will run into some other ways that these are described, but these are the basic kinds of proverbs that you will find in the book. Okay, let's go on to the guideline 3. It says 4 on here. I realize that, but this is a different presentation that I use. So guideline 4, Proverbs are not promises. Proverbs are not promises. What's a promise in the Bible? How about believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you shall be saved? That's a promise, right? Which means there is no one who will ever believe and not be saved. Right? Okay. So we do have promises, but there is a problem with Proverbs in that people will often take them as promises when they really aren't written that way, and I'll explain that. Okay. So let's just start to think through this. We probably won't get finished here. We'll finish this up on Wednesday. Proverbs, first of all, are based upon the observation of an ordered universe. They are based upon the observation of an ordered universe. While God is giving the moral instruction in it, Proverbs are couched in terms of what normally happens in God's universe. All right? And so they do tie to an ordered universe. But we know that God sometimes messes with the order, don't we? Therefore, they move in the realm of cause and effect. They do move in the realm of cause and effect. You do this, this happens. Okay? And so we do find this very we do find working what we find in the physical universe. In the realm of an ordered universe and cause and effect. And Proverbs do always tell us what is the right course to follow. They always tell us what is the right course to follow. And so I never have to wonder if Proverbs' advice is good or not. It is. But sometimes, when I follow Proverbs, the anticipated result does not happen. Can anybody give me a case or an example? Amanda?
Proverbs says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old,
Not depart from it. It has caused countless numbers of parents to doubt their whole parenting abilities. You raise 5 good children and 1 rotten apple. Does that happen? Okay. Did the parents fail in that case? So we have this issue to deal with. And this is why this fourth point is so important, that Proverbs do not guarantee the outcome that is expected and generally experienced. Okay? Now, when you first hear this, you react. You say, wait. You're messing around with God's Word. You're just, But we know it doesn't. We know that they are not uncategorical promises like the promise, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you shall be saved. What is the clear proof of that? For instance, it says that the righteous man, his enemies will always be at peace with him, or the man whose answer is such, his enemies will always be at peace with him. Can you think of an example in the Bible where that didn't happen? Or it wasn't the fault of the person? David with Saul? Jesus. Do you suppose Jesus ever failed in any of the Proverbs? Were his enemies at peace with him? Did his soft answer turn away wrath? In every case? In any case? No. If they were promises, if they were absolutely guaranteed to work in every case, then Jesus' life would have been differently because he was the righteous man. Did he prolong his life in his righteousness? No. Now, let me say this, and I'll come back and we'll flesh this out on Wednesday. Because God is free to enter in and to do things that, we don't understand, then the promises, while we generally expect them to work out, the Proverbs, don't always. And the illustration of that primarily is Job, isn't it? Job was a righteous man. There was none like him. That's God's commentary on Job's life. And then what happens to Job? All the bad things. And what do his friends come and say? Hey, Proverbs are promises. And because you're suffering, it means you have sinned somewhere. Remember we talked about retribution theology first semester? Okay? And so that's what we're dealing with. How do you handle these maxims that tell you how to have a successful life against the exceptions? And part of the answer is understanding the difference between a promise and what Proverbs are in terms of generalizations about how you can expect life to work in regard to your behavior.